Understanding the right camera settings, positions and movements is essential for making a good video. But what are the most important things you need to know and how can you achieve them in Blender? Here's what I've learned. Number 1 is the golden ratio, and it guides how scenes are framed to make them more naturally attractive and pleasing to the eye. That means that it's oftentimes better to place the object not directly in the middle of the frame, but rather to the side. In Blender you can activate a grid for the camera to see where you should place the main objects. And if you select the camera, then you can go to the Object Data Properties, Viewport Display and Composition Guides. And here you will find the golden ratio, and then you will see a grid here. But one thing, in movies, especially if you have a widescreen format, oftentimes also the rule of thirds is used, which you can activate here, and it's oriented on the golden ratio, but the crossing points are a bit more at the side. Basically, all what the grid is saying is that the main objects should be there where these lines are crossing. So in a scene like this, I would rather go with the rule of thirds, because we have two characters and with the golden ratio they would be too close together, because then they would have to be here and here. So we deactivate the golden ratio, and then as you can see it perfectly fits for the rule of thirds here. If we only have a single main object, like here, then it can be even more important. So let's compare it. Now he's directly in the middle of the frame, and then I place him more to the right side. And as you can see, it's a bit more appealing, because he also speaks to the right side, and then it makes more sense that the right side is more free. And here the golden ratio probably makes more sense than the rule of thirds, because we also only have one main object. So yeah, I would place him like this. Does the golden ratio or rule of thirds always make sense? No, especially if you want to have a very straight focus on the character or want to make some kind of symmetrical designs, then you can also place him directly in the middle of the frame. And it also don't have to be perfect all the time, so that the head or whatever is always directly in the middle of the crossing points, but it's a good orientation to start with and to understand what's appealing for most of us. The next important thing is the 30-degree roll, and it just says that the camera rotation between the different shots should be at least 30 degrees, so that it's not distracting for the viewer. Like here for example, if I set keyframes for the rotation and location and go a frame further and change the rotation of the camera only about 5 degrees and go a bit to the right side so that we are in the golden ratio again, and set keyframes, and then if I play the animation, as you can see it's pretty distracting for us because it's just such a small movement. But if I now rotate the camera at least 30 degrees and put it a bit to the right side and set keyframes again, then as you can see it's way less distracting for us. The only time I would go under 30 degrees between the shots is when we have a very close shot, for example, and then want to make a wide shot after it. So like here, if we go a frame further and zoom out like this, set another keyframe and play the animation, then yeah, it would be okay. So the shot size would have to be different enough. And then we also have the 180-degree roll, and this says that you shouldn't switch the side between many situations like normal conversations, for example, because otherwise it's a bit distracting for us since we don't know who is where anymore, and it really helps the viewer if you don't go over 180 degrees. So between a conversation you can change the camera position to here or also here if you want. But you shouldn't switch to the other side because then also the position of the characters are flipped, and this can be a bit distracting to the viewer. Yeah, so don't do this if it's not really necessary. Now let's go to the camera settings, and maybe you have already asked why it's black outside of the camera view, and this is very easy to make. You just have to go to the camera and then object data properties, and under viewport display you can change the passepartout to 1, because normally it's set to 0.5, and then yeah, what is outside the camera is only grayed out but still visible. And if you don't want to be distracted by it, then you can set it to 1. The second thing is that I would always look that this lock here is locked, because if it isn't, the camera isn't locked to the view. And so, for example, if I move the view, I don't move the camera, and this can be very annoying. Since Blender 4.2, the lock is directly here accessible, but if you have an earlier Blender version, then you can go to View and make sure that you have checked this checkbox here. But of course, as long as it's unlocked, you can adjust your frame how you want it. So you can make it smaller or move it a bit to the side, and then just lock it again, and then you move the camera with it. And maybe you already noticed another thing. As you can see, we are in solid mode, but we can still see the textures here. And this can be super useful because the solid mode is mostly much faster than the Eevee preview. And you can do that by just clicking here on the arrow and then go from material to texture. And then you can see also the textures in solid mode. And one more thing many people don't know. As you can see, if we go to the object data properties, we have activated depth of field, but we can't see it in solid mode. But you can go here to this arrow again and activate it here with this checkbox, and then you can also see it here directly in the preview in solid mode. Now to some settings, and these you probably use already. So here you can set a focus object, or you can change the focus distance manually if you want. And here you can change the f-stop. So if I make it higher, the focus range is bigger, and so the background isn't blurred out anymore. But if I make it very small, then yeah, we only have a very small focus range. But what are the blades? The number of blades affects the shape of the bouquet. If the blades are set to 0, it means the bouquet will be completely round. It will have no visible edges or corners, but will appear perfectly circular. In this case, Blender simulates an aperture without any blades, which is not possible in the real world. If you want to make it more realistic, then you shouldn't set it to 0 here. Normally 12 is a good number, but just to show you, if I set it to 3 for example, then as you can see, the shape of the bouquet is more polygonal, and this would be too less. And if you want, you can also change the rotation of the blades. So as you can see in the background, the bouquet rotates with it like this. And here you can also change the ratio, but don't make this number too low, because then it gets really stretched like this. And one more thing, if you set up the focus distance manually and are not sure if the object you want is 100% sharp, then you can go out of camera view, and under viewport display, you can activate limits, and then you can see where the current focus of the camera is. So like here, this is quite good, I would say. You can put it a bit at the front like this. But what can we do if we have a room like this and we want to have most of it visible in the frame? The first thing could be just reducing the focal length. So if I make this number smaller, then we can also see more in the frame, but it also gets stretched at the side. So we can't make it too small, it's like a wide angle lens. The other thing is the focal length also affects the depth of field. So if I activate it here and I increase it here to 24 again, then as you can see we have a very blurred out background and only the chair is sharp. But if I decrease it again, then as you can see, more and more of the background and also of the foreground will be sharp again. So the higher the focal length is, the smaller is the depth of field. And if you want to have a blurred background and also not a distorted image, then the focal length shouldn't be too small. But you can also counteract here with the f-stop, of course, if you want to have a more blurred background, like this. But sometimes we still have to go further behind with the camera to see everything. And yeah, then there could be a wall or some other objects. And what can we do then? The one thing could be just hiding all these objects, but that's a bit complicated. And a more easier solution is just increasing the clip start. So just to show you, I go into camera view, and as you can see, we only see the wall. But if I increase it to maybe 1 here, then as you can see, the objects directly in front of the camera are skipped and we can directly see the room. And if you want, you could also change the clip end. So if I decrease the number to 5, for example, then as you can see, all the objects are skipped that are further away. Now let's come to the camera movements, and let's start with the basics. You could add a keyframe for the location and rotation, and then go a bit further and change the position a bit like this and set keyframes again. And if we then play the animation, we have our movement. And then you could also say that you mark all the keyframes you want, and then you can make a right click on it and go to interpolation mode and set it to linear, for example. And then we have a linear movement. And if you want to have more control over the speed, you can open the graph editor, and it's here. And if we zoom out a bit, then we can see all the keyframes we have set. And now I can select them here again, make a right click, go to interpolation mode and set it to Bezier again. And then we can change the fade in and fade out speed for every curve separately. So for example, if I go back to 1 and play the animation, so is how it looks at the moment. And if I now want to change the Z rotation, I just click on it and then I click on the middle point if I want to change the fade in speed. And then I can make it slower or faster, or change it how I want it. And here, for example, the beginning rotation is slower and then it gets faster at the end. And you can just do it like that for every single curve. But what if you want to do something like an arc shot so that the camera is moving around the character? This would be very hard to keyframe and not really smooth, but you can do that by just adding an empty first and then place it under the character or at the same position where the character is. And then here we choose the camera again and then go to the constraints and add a child of, and then we choose the empty. And then we can select the empty again, and if you don't see it, then you can change the size here and make it a bit bigger like this. And the cool thing is, if we rotate the empty, then we also rotate it with the camera. And yeah, this is pretty simple and very useful. And of course you can also parent the empty then to the character in this case. Yeah, and if I now change the character, then yeah, it goes with it. If you also want to change the distance between the camera and the character during the rotation, then it's a bit hard if the rotation here isn't at 0, because then you would have to change the X value and also the Y value and maybe also the Z value. So what is a bit easier for us, if we delete the child of constraint first, then set here a straight number like 90, and if we set these numbers to 0, and then we have to place the character in the middle. So basically we have to set here the same X position as the character, and then we can set this to -100 for example, and 12, something like this, and then we can add a new constraint. child off, and we select the empty again. And the cool thing is, if I now rotate it, then I can also here go back to the camera, and here with the Y value, yeah, I can smoothly change the distance to the character and it's perfectly aligned. Now let's come to more specific movements, because you could also add a curve here and select path. And if we go into edit mode, it's a bit small, so I scale it up first with S10 for example, go into edit mode again, and then I can change here the direction of the curve, like this for example. Then I go out of edit mode, put it a bit to the front, and I select my camera and add a new constraint and select follow path. And then I select the curve. And now if we take a look, we don't see anything. And that's because we first have to set the location values to 0. And then, yeah, maybe these also to 0. We can align it a bit like this. So now we should see the character here. Perfect. And now we can change the camera position with the offset like this. And this is pretty nice, but the problem is, as you can see, yeah, it doesn't follow the object, of course. And yeah, there's also a solution for this. So let's add a new constraint and select track 2. And then we select Woody as the target. And then if I change the offset of the curve, then as you can see, it's still perfectly aligned. But of course, it's here too low because it's aligned to the origin point of the object. So the best thing would be to just add a new empty like we did before. It's here, and then we can choose as the target the new empty. And now we can put it up like this. And if I go to the camera and change the offset, then as you can see, yeah, now it fits. Or if you have a rig character, then you could also choose the rig as the target. So I go out of camera mode here and choose the rig. And then I can also select a specific bone here. So for example, the head. And then it's aligned to the head. The problem is, if you use the track 2 constraint, then you can't change the rotation values of the camera here. So regardless of which values I set, nothing happens. But what you can do here is just add another empty, and then you can call it like maybe camera rotation. So this empty is only for the camera rotation. And then we click on the camera and add a new constraint. And then we select copy rotation. And as the target, we choose the camera rotation empty. And here under mix, we choose after original. And now if I click on this empty, I can also control the rotation here. But what can we do if we want to change the target of the camera during the shot so that it's firstly aligned to Woody and then to the Nutcracker? For that, you can just add another track 2 constraint, and then for the second we choose the Nutcracker. And if I go to the camera view now, you can see it's aligned to the Nutcracker. Because always keep in mind, the lower constraint always overrides the upper one. So for now I set it to 0. And then I want to have the switch at 40 for example. Then I set here a keyframe, and then also at 50 a keyframe with the influence 1. And then as you can see, it switches. And for the Nutcracker we could also add a new empty, of course, which we put a bit up so that it's aligned to the face or where we want it, and then parent it to the object.
To infinity and beyond, baby!
Here's a good example from one of my short films where I combined different things together. So first of all, I parented this camera to this empty with a child off constraint. And when I play this animation, then as you can see, we get our cycle movement because we only rotate this empty here. And if you want, you can also adjust it a bit with the location values so that it gets further away or nearer. After that, I also added a track 2 constraint, and as the target I choose this empty here so that we have more control to which direction the camera is aligned. And then I can add a follow path constraint for this empty so that it also follows this path like bars. And then if I play this animation, as you can see, it follows this path, but I can also additionally control it with the location values here. And then we get this result. Camera shakes are quite often very important to make your scene more lively or dramatic. Sometimes you need small movements, sometimes bigger ones, and there's an add-on for it called Camera Shakeify, which you can download for free on Gumroad and which can do all that for you very nice. If you have downloaded and installed it, just go to your camera and then you will find the new Camera Shakeify tab here. And here's how it looks at the moment. So we only have the movement without any shakes. And then I just have to click on the plus button. And then we already have some shakes here. And now I can change the settings. Here, for example, the influence. I can make the shakes weaker or stronger like this. I can change the scaling like this, or even the speed. And I also can change the frame offset if I want, so that it starts with another shake, like this. And you can choose between all kind of shake types. So here, for example, I can change it to close up, and then we only have a very subtle movement here. Or I can change it to Handycam run, which is a very strong movement. And then I can change it here to 1 again. And yeah, maybe this fits the best. And you can also combine different shake types together. So I can just click on the plus button again and then choose here the investigation, for example. And then we have both shakes combined together. If your PC is too slow to play the animation in real time, like here, we only have 12 FPS, then you can go to playback and switch to frame dropping. And then some frames are dropped, but we can see it in real time with the right speed. If you make animations, then it's also very important to activate motion blur, of course. Because if you don't do this, the video will look a bit choppy and this is really something you don't want. But two things you should know here. The first thing is, the higher the frame rate is, the less motion blur you will have. And the second thing is, here directly under the motion blur properties, there's shutter. Normally this is at 2.5 and this is the best setting for most of your shots. But if you have some shots where you especially want to have more motion blur than normal, then you could increase it here. So for example, if I set it to 1, then I have twice as much motion blur than before. Here's a little comparison with the shutters at 2.5 and 1.0. So especially for scenes like that, it can make sense to increase the motion blur to make it more dramatic. What's also very cool that you can simply change the lens type under the camera settings. So here I can also set it to orthographic or panoramic. And then, for example, I choose the fisheye, but why don't we see anything changing? The problem is we first have to go to the render preview and then you will see the effect. And here we can play a bit with the settings, so I could increase the focal length like this, or I could also increase the field of view like this. And yeah, also the clip start or clip end like we discussed before. Last but not least, what is the Dolly Zoom? It uses the perspective distortions caused by changing the focal length, while also going nearer to the object. So like here for example, we start with a focal length of 48, and now I set a keyframe, and I also set a keyframe for the position, and then I go to the last frame, and now I set it to 24 for example, so that it's half of the focal length as before. Then I set a keyframe again, and here we go nearer with the camera so that it's the same cutout as before, like this. And then I mark the keyframes here, right click and go to interpolation mode and say linear. And then it looks like this. And because of this trick, the focus gets more to the character, as it looks like that the background gets further away. Okay, that was it. I think now you have everything you need to know to make cool camera movements, and I can't wait to see your work. And if you liked the video, then please leave a thumbs up or comment below, and then I see you next time.